big topic being discussed in the world media is representatives of the military leadership of Ukraine and the U.S. Department of Defense comment on the use of North Korean troops in the assaults in the Kursk region. These events became known a few days ago, and there are videos and intelligence reports. President Zelensky commented on this topic last night after the report of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. General Alexander Syrsky, and Syrsky provided details of the participation of North Korean soldiers in the battles on the side of the Russian army in Kursk. These details relate, in particular, to the nature of the use of infantry assault groups by the DPRK and the Russians, as well as the losses suffered by these forces during the first combat clash with the Ukrainian Defense Forces in Kursk. Below is the president's direct speech, and let's listen to what Zelensky said about this yesterday. The Chief of Staff reported on the participation of North Korean soldiers, providing details of the destruction of these forces. The Russians are trying to hide the North Koreans' losses. The Ukrainian Defense Forces and our intelligence have collected complete information on the real losses of Russian units, which also involved Koreans. Unfortunately, we also have to defend ourselves against them, although there is no reason for Koreans to die in this war. The only reason is Putin's madness, which has gripped Russia and is fueling this war. We will continue to defend our positions. The point is that the Russians and their propaganda are trying to hide the significant losses of North Koreans in the fighting in the Kursk region. These losses amount to dozens of killed and about 100 wounded during the first assaults near Malaya Lochna, Martinivka, Plekhovo, and other settlements in Kursk Oblast, where Korean assault groups were used. All of this was recorded on drone cameras, and footage from Kursk region was distributed by Magyar and other units. The Russians are now trying to replenish these units that have suffered losses and use them again in combat. There is also clear drone footage showing North Korean soldiers in Kursk Oblast in positions, shelters, and trenches under trees, looking at drones circling overhead. You can clearly see that these are North Koreans. You can see it in their facial features and other characteristic features. There are a lot of videos of them communicating with each other while in combat positions, and by the language and various visual elements, we can determine that this is a large-scale use of North Korean troops. It is also possible to assess the nature of these assaults, when troops such as Kim Jong-un's move in large assault groups, while the Russians have long since switched to using smaller, less visible assault groups. The North Koreans were involved in large numbers and stormed en masse, resulting in high casualties. At the same time, the Pentagon confirmed the deaths of North Korean soldiers in the fighting in Kursk. This was announced during a briefing by Pentagon spokesman Major General Patrick Ryder. He said that, according to the Pentagon, North Korean soldiers took part in the fighting in Kursk, suffering both killed and wounded. Patrick Ryder noted that there are no details on the number of dead and added that the fighting took place last week. Indeed, on Thursday and Friday of last week, reports with visual evidence of these clashes began to appear in the area of Mala-Lochnia in Kursk region. Such messages are coming from the United States. Speaking of American events and yesterday's high-profile statements, it is worth referring to the press conference given by President Trump. As Trump approaches his inauguration, he is actively commenting on both domestic political events and international issues. At yesterday's press conference, he announced that he would authorize Ukraine to use ATACMS to strike targets deep inside Russia. Donald Trump called this authorization, which was granted by the Biden administration, a mistake, and believes that Ukraine should move towards concluding an agreement to end the war. Such strikes deep into Russia lead to the opposite effect, to an escalation of hostilities. Quoting Donald Trump, who said during a press conference at his residence in Florida, he said verbatim the following: "I don't think the Biden administration should have allowed missiles to be launched 200 miles into Russia." It was not a few weeks before I took office that this had to be done. I would not have done that. I think it was a big mistake, Trump said. When asked if he could reconsider this decision, Trump said that he could, in principle, reconsider. At the same time, he switched the topic to the conclusion of a peace agreement and said that there was some progress in this matter. Some progress. In a conversation with Trump in Paris, President Zelensky confirmed his readiness to move toward a truce, according to Trump, and this is a very positive signal. But it is not only Zelensky who needs to conclude such an agreement. Putin needs to conclude this agreement as well. Trump did not receive positive signals from Putin. Answering questions from journalists, he said that he had not invited Zelensky to his inauguration, but would be happy if he came. That is, the invitation has not yet been sent to the Ukrainian leadership.
Дональд Трамп, тобто, очевидно, мова про те, що таке запрошення – це питання майбутнього часу. Наразі воно не було направлено українському військово-політичному керівництву і президенту Зеленському.
We talk about these statements by Donald Trump about ATACMS, his position on the war in Ukraine, and other important international issues with Ivan Us, senior advisor at the National Institute for Strategic Studies. Mr. Ivan, we welcome you to Channel 24. We are glad to see you. I welcome you, Mr. Andriy, and I welcome all the viewers of Channel 24. How should we understand, interpret, and perceive Donald Trump's statement that ATACMS is a mistake, that Ukraine should not have been allowed to hit ATACMS in the final stages of the Biden administration, and that Trump views this permission rather negatively? You know, I see Trump as a human being who is very fond of criticizing her opponents, Democrats, and this also applies to President Obama. Which was before Trump's first term, and Biden, which was between Trump's two terms. He likes to constantly remind us of the mistakes that his predecessors made, and therefore, when he criticizes the decision to allow Ukraine to use these missiles deep into Russia, I think he is not so much criticizing this permission as he is criticizing Biden, who gave this permission. Based on this psychological portrait of Trump, I do not exclude that once he becomes President of the United States after January 20th next year, nothing will change in this authorization. On the contrary, perhaps he will say that it was a missing, very late authorization, and Biden gave it too late. Now, as president, I can expand on this a bit. Why do I think this way? Because if we recall the story of the aid to Ukraine from the United States, which lasted more than 6 months in the U.S. House of Representatives, when it was finally given to Ukraine, there was an interesting phrase from Speaker Mike Johnson, a person close to Trump. He said that we shouldn't micromanage our assistance to Ukraine. And what he meant by this phrase was that if we give Ukraine weapons, we shouldn't tell them what they can and cannot do. In other words, we gave everything. Use it. Period. Why bother with trifles, saying that you can't hit here and you can hit there? That's why, first of all, Trump's statements repeat this negative position towards his predecessors. We also have to remember the posts he made right after the events in Syria started, where he blamed Barack Obama a lot, saying that it was a mistake to invite Russia to Syria, and that mistake was very costly. But he was pleased with the way things were going, emphasizing that the U.S. would not intervene. It was not their war.